My name is Alex, and I'm 27 years old. If you ask my parents, they'd probably say I was the difficult one in the family. Not because I was rebellious or irresponsible, quite the opposite. I worked hard, paid my own bills, and kept my life in order. But in their eyes, that just made me the default problem solver, the one expected to give a little more whenever someone else in the family was struggling. And by someone else, I mean my older sister, Emily. Emily was 30, but you'd never guess it from the way she lived her life. She had never held a steady job for more than a few months, always had some excuse for why she couldn't pay rent, and somehow managed to convince my parents that none of it was her fault. She had a way of twisting every situation to make herself the victim. Her boss was always out to get her. Her roommates were toxic, and the job market was impossible. Meanwhile, she lived in a cycle of bouncing between my parents' house and whatever friend was naive enough to let her crash on their couch. I had learned early on that if I wanted a stable, peaceful life, I needed to keep my distance. It wasn't easy, though. My parents had a habit of roping me into her problems, usually with some kind of guilt trip about helping family or being lucky enough to have a good job. That's why I had worked so hard to set boundaries, to make it clear that I wasn't her personal safety net. But as I would soon find out, my parents never really respected those boundaries. They just waited for the right moment to ignore them completely. It all came to a head at a family dinner. I should have seen the signs the moment I walked into my parents' house. My mom was being extra nice, my dad was unusually quiet, and Emily was barely looking at me. Something was up, but I had no idea just how bad it was going to be. Dinner started off normal enough, with the usual small talk and my mom's passive-aggressive comments about how she never sees me anymore. I mostly just nodded along, focusing on my food and waiting for the night to be over. Then, just as I was starting to think I'd escape without too much drama, my mom set down her fork, folded her hands on the table, and hit me with it. "So, Alex," she said, in that overly sweet voice she used when she was about to say something I wouldn't like, "your sister's going to be moving in with you for a little while." I almost choked on my food. The room went completely silent, like they were all waiting for me to just accept it and move on. But I didn't say anything. Not yet. I just sat there, staring at them, waiting for the rest of the explanation. Because there was always more. And sure enough, my mom kept going. "She's had a really rough time lately, and you have that nice place all to yourself," she continued, as if it was the most logical thing in the world. "It just makes sense. You can help her get back on her feet, and she won't be a burden on us." A burden on them. Because heaven forbid my parents actually tell Emily to take responsibility for her own life. No, that was my job, apparently. But I still didn't say anything. I just sat there, letting them talk, watching the whole situation unfold like a slow-motion car crash. Yeah, my dad chimed in, finally deciding to contribute. "It's not like you can't afford it. And she really just needs a stable place to figure things out." That was when Emily finally decided to speak. "It'll only be for a few months," she said, in a voice that sounded suspiciously rehearsed. And, like, I can help out with stuff around the apartment, too. That was a lie, and we all knew it. Emily didn't help out with anything. She barely even cleaned up after herself. But I still didn't react. I just nodded slightly, like I was considering it. Because, in reality, I was waiting. Waiting for them to finish their little speech. Waiting for them to really commit to this idea. Waiting for them to make the biggest mistake of all, assuming that I was actually going to go along with it. I let the silence stretch just long enough to make them uncomfortable. I could feel their eyes on me, waiting for some kind of reaction, anger, frustration, resistance. But I didn't give them any of that. Instead, I exhaled slowly, set my fork down, and nodded. "Okay," I said simply. For a moment, nobody spoke. My mom blinked, like she hadn't expected me to agree so easily. My dad looked relieved, as if he had been bracing for an argument. And Emily, well, Emily just smirked, like she had won some kind of battle she hadn't even fought. "Really?" my mom asked, narrowing her eyes. "You're okay with this?" I shrugged. "Sure. If it helps Emily get back on her feet, I don't see why not." That was all it took. My parents instantly relaxed, and my mom launched into a whole speech about how proud she was of me for stepping up as a sibling. My dad nodded approvingly, and Emily, who had clearly been prepared to argue, just leaned back in her chair, looking smug. I could already see her wheels turning. She probably thought she had pulled off some kind of master manipulation, that I had caved just as she and my parents had planned. I could picture her mentally moving into my apartment, deciding which room she'd take over, imagining how she'd rearrange things to make herself comfortable. And why wouldn't she? She had gotten away with it before. When we were younger, she used to steal my clothes and act shocked when I got mad about it. When she was in college, she borrowed my laptop and conveniently forgot to give it back. When she got her first apartment and couldn't pay rent, she convinced our parents to pressure me into covering for her. Just this once, of course, except it never was. Emily wasn't just entitled. She was a professional at twisting reality, making herself look helpless, and making me look like the unreasonable one whenever I pushed back. But this time, she had no idea what was coming. So, when's she moving in? I asked casually, taking another bite of food like this was just a normal conversation. My mom practically beamed. Oh, we figured this weekend. That way she can get settled in before she starts looking for work again. This weekend. Perfect. Emily stretched her arms behind her head, like she had just won the lottery. Yeah, I don't have that much stuff, anyway. Mostly clothes, a few boxes. It won't take long to set up. I nodded again, like this was all fine by me. Sounds good. Just let me know what time, and I'll be there. That part, at least, wasn't a lie. I would absolutely be there. Not at the apartment, of course. No, I'd be somewhere much better, watching from a safe distance as Emily, my parents, and a car full of her stuff pulled up to my former apartment. The one I hadn't lived in for weeks. The one I had sold. The one that now belonged to an entirely new tenant who had no idea what was about to happen. And I wasn't going to stop them. Not yet. I was going to let them find out exactly what their little plan had gotten them into. The days leading up to that weekend felt like they dragged on forever. Every time I thought about what was about to happen, a grin tugged at the corners of my mouth, but I kept my cool around my parents. I didn't want them getting any suspicious vibes from me. Instead, I let the plan unfold exactly as I had imagined it, like a slow-moving train wreck, but with me on the sidelines, casually watching it all happen. Saturday came, and I spent the day out of the apartment, doing things I had been putting off for weeks. It was perfect timing. My parents would show up at the apartment, expecting to unload all of Emily's things, and they'd soon realize something had gone very, very wrong. Around noon, my phone buzzed. I didn't recognize the number, so I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, I heard my phone ring again, and this time, I decided to answer. Hello, I said, trying to sound as casual as possible. Alex, my mom's voice came through, tight with frustration. What's going on? I could hear my dad's voice in the background, raising his tone as well. They weren't angry yet, just confused, disoriented, like they had walked into the wrong house or found themselves in a strange, unfamiliar situation. What do you mean? I asked, trying to sound innocent. We just got here, my mom continued, her voice cracking. What is this? The apartment's gone. The landlord says it was sold weeks ago, and there's a new tenant living here now. I couldn't help it. My lips curled into a smile. Oh, really? That's so weird. I didn't know anything about that, I replied, playing the part of the confused, completely uninvolved son. But I guess I should have mentioned it sooner, huh? My dad's voice cut in, sharp with frustration. What's going on, Alex? Why didn't you tell us? You promised Emily she could move in, and now we're stuck here with her stuff. It took everything in me not to burst out laughing. I could hear Emily in the background now, her voice growing louder, panicked, like she was trying to piece together the situation. It was music to my ears. Listen, I don't know what to tell you, I said, keeping my voice calm. I thought you guys were aware. I moved out a few weeks ago. Sold the place. Didn't think I needed to mention it, since, well, it wasn't really relevant to me anymore. There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. What do you mean? Sold the place? My mom sounded like she was trying to process the words. You sold your apartment? You didn't even tell us? Yeah, I said, taking my time with the words. It was kind of a last-minute thing, honestly. I guess I didn't want to make a big deal out of it. But, yeah, I moved out. New chapter and all that. My dad's voice rose in pitch. So, what are we supposed to do now, Alex? You can't just drop something like that on us. Emily had plans, and we've already packed her things up. You don't think we deserve to know what's going on? I leaned back in my chair, trying to keep the smirk off my face. I was loving this. You know, I really did think you guys would know, I said, dragging it out. I guess I assumed you were in the loop. You know how I can be quiet, keeping to myself. Maybe I should have called you when I moved, but honestly, I didn't think it was that important. You didn't ask, and I didn't offer. The frustration was palpable on the other side of the phone. My mom's voice had that edge of helplessness now, like she had been completely blindsided. But you told us you were fine there. You said you were happy with your apartment. Yeah, I was. But I guess things change, I replied smoothly, adding just enough detachment to make it sound casual. I didn't really expect to give it away like that. But, well, the offer was too good to refuse. A heavy silence hung in the air for a moment, broken only by the distant sound of Emily grumbling in the background. My dad was the first to speak again, but his voice was trembling with anger now. Why didn't you tell us, Alex? He asked, his tone accusatory. You could have at least let us know. Now we're stuck in this mess, and Emily, I didn't let him finish. Look, Dad, you're acting like I did something wrong. I'm just living my life, and this was my decision. You know how things go with me. I do what works for me, and I don't check in with everyone else every step of the way. I mean, I'm not a kid anymore. My mom cut in before my dad could respond. So what are we supposed to do now? Are you going to fix this? Or should we just drag Emily's stuff back home? I let the question hang in the air for a second before answering. Well, I said, pausing for effect, I guess that's up to you. You could always, figure it out on your own. I'm sure there's a nice couch somewhere for Emily to sleep on. There was another long silence. I could practically feel the tension through the phone. My mom's next words were barely audible, filled with a mix of disbelief and anger. This isn't fair, Alex. You're just going to leave us to deal with it. I sighed dramatically, leaning back even further in my chair. Look, I'm sorry. I guess I should have told you sooner, but, sometimes life just happens. You can't expect me to always be the one to pick up the pieces. Emily's voice broke through again, louder this time, a mix of frustration and panic. What is all this, Alex? I grinned. I don't know what you want me to say, maybe you should have figured things out yourself before relying on other people to solve your problems. The sound of Emily muttering something under her breath made me grin even wider, but I wasn't done yet. I had them right where I wanted them. I was enjoying this way too much to let it go. Anyway, gotta run, I said casually, cutting the conversation short. Good luck with everything, though. I'm sure it'll work out. And with that, I hung up, my fingers still buzzing from the tension I just left behind. I didn't know it yet, but this was only the beginning. I spent the rest of my afternoon with a strange mixture of satisfaction and anticipation, letting the chaos I'd just unleashed simmer for a bit. I knew my parents weren't the type to just give up. They put up a front of confusion, sure, but that was only the first stage. Once they realized they were actually stuck, that's when the drama would really kick in. And Emily? Well, she would probably try to play the victim, as usual. But I had no intention of letting them off the hook. Not this time. By the time I got back to my apartment, the sun had started to dip below the horizon, casting a soft orange glow over everything. I walked through the door of my apartment, locked it behind me, and settled into the couch to unwind. I was so calm. I didn't even feel guilty. This was payback. Simple, poetic revenge for all the times they took advantage of me, manipulated me, and made me feel like I was just a backup plan when things didn't go their way. Around an hour later, I heard a knock at the door. I was instantly alert. I checked the peephole. My heart skipped a beat. It was them. My parents, Emily, and, wait for it, her stuff. The car was parked out front, the trunk open with boxes and bags piled high, like some scene straight out of a bad sitcom. For a moment, I stood there, staring at them through the peephole, feeling a sick sort of glee. They had actually tracked me down. They had no idea I was living here now, though. That was the best part. They thought they were just showing up to the new place, my old place, but they were about to walk straight into a confrontation. I opened the door slowly, making sure I was calm, collected, and in control. Alex, my mom's voice came first, hesitant, almost pleading. We tried calling, but you didn't pick up. We managed to figure out where you were living now. I raised an eyebrow. Oh, did you? How'd you manage that? Never mind that, my dad cut in, sounding defensive. We need to talk. You need to make this right. You did say Emily could move in here, and now she's got her things. We don't have anywhere else to go. I leaned against the doorframe, casually crossing my arms over my chest. That's the thing, though, isn't it? I never said Emily could move in here. My dad's eyes widened, and I could tell his patience was running thin. Come on, Alex, don't make this harder than it has to be. You can't just leave us hanging like this. We came all this way, and now you're just going to refuse to help your sister out? What kind of brother are you? Emily, standing just behind my parents, was glaring at me. I could almost see her mind trying to work through the situation, piecing it together in real time. This is ridiculous, Alex. You said you'd let me move in, and now you're acting like you don't even know who we are. We've been in your life long enough for you to be decent about this. Is that so? I said, holding back a smile. You really think you're entitled to just walk into my apartment like this is some kind of hotel? I could see the moment they realized they had made a massive mistake. The realization was slow, but it hit them like a ton of bricks. I was living here. This apartment was mine, my real home, and they had shown up with Emily's bags, expecting a free ride. Emily's face flushed bright red with anger. What is this, Alex? You're really going to do this to me? After everything? I stayed quiet for a few beats, watching their expressions shift from confusion to frustration and, finally, to embarrassment. This was the moment they realized they'd been played, and the moment I decided to turn the screws even tighter. Look, I said, taking a step closer to them, I don't know how to put this any more clearly. This is my apartment. I didn't sell it. I didn't give it away. I'm not offering a free place for anyone. Not anymore. I could tell my parents were trying to process what I was saying. My mom looked like she was about to argue, but she stopped herself. The idea that I, Alex, the one who was always pushed around, was now standing in the way was too much for her to take in. You lied to us, Alex, my dad growled. You lied about everything. You knew this would happen, and now you're just leaving us to deal with your sister's problems. I shrugged. I didn't lie. You just didn't ask the right questions. Emily stepped forward now, hands on her hips, glaring at me. You're not even a real brother. I'm family, Alex. You're just going to throw me out like this? What happened to being there for each other? I looked at her blankly. I'm not throwing you out, Em. I'm just not opening the door for you. The tension was thick in the air. It felt like the perfect storm was coming, and I was the calm before the chaos. I could hear Emily's voice rising, a blend of frustration and desperation. My dad was pacing, muttering under his breath. My mom was on the verge of a breakdown, her face flushed with anger. It was almost too easy. Then Emily snapped. Fine, if you won't let me in, we'll just have to make you. My heart skipped a beat as she stepped toward the door. For a brief moment, I thought she might actually try to force her way in. But that was the point when I decided I'd had enough. I took a deep breath, stepped forward, and pulled my phone from my pocket. I didn't say a word. I simply dialed the police. Hello, I said, keeping my voice steady and calm. I need to report trespassing. My parents and Emily stopped dead in their tracks, their faces going pale as they realized what I was doing. I didn't take my eyes off them as I spoke to the operator, calmly explaining the situation. I've asked my family to leave, I said, keeping my voice even, but they're refusing. They're trying to move into my apartment without permission, and I feel unsafe. I glanced at Emily, watching her face twist with anger and disbelief. My mom had gone completely silent, and my dad looked like he was trying to figure out how to save face. This is going to end badly for you, Emily muttered, her voice venomous. I smiled a little, my voice steady. We'll see about that, Em. We'll see. As I ended the call with the operator, I felt the full weight of my decision settle in. The next step was out of my hands. It was time for them to face the consequences. The sound of a siren in the distance was the only warning I got before the police arrived. The family stood frozen, looking over at me with wide, anxious eyes, as if they'd hoped I'd back down at the last second. But I didn't move an inch. I was beyond done. I had put up with their manipulative antics for years, and this was the moment I was finally going to reclaim my space, my peace, and my life. The officer who stepped out of the squad car was a tall woman with short-cropped brown hair and a no-nonsense look on her face. She glanced at me first, then at my parents and Emily, who were now awkwardly shuffling on the doorstep. They looked like kids caught sneaking into a house they weren't supposed to be in. Good evening, the officer greeted, her voice firm but polite. I understand there's an issue here? I nodded, my voice calm but with a sharp edge. Yes, officer. These people, I gestured toward my parents and sister, are trespassing. They showed up at my apartment, expecting to move in without my permission. I've asked them to leave multiple times, and now I'm concerned that they might try to force their way in. The officer glanced at my parents and then at Emily. Is this true? She asked, her tone not unkind but definitely direct. My parents hesitated. They clearly didn't want to admit they had miscalculated, but the truth was already on the table. Emily was the first to speak, her voice laced with frustration and denial. He's lying, she snapped, her arms crossed defensively. He invited me here. We came to move in like he said, and now he's trying to throw me out after everything I've done for him. I'm his sister. I deserve this. The officer didn't flinch at her outburst. Ma'am, if Mr. Alex has told you that this is his property and he's asked you to leave, then you were trespassing. You can't just show up to someone's home uninvited and expect them to accommodate you. I could see my parents trying to wriggle out of it, shifting uncomfortably under the officer's gaze. Look, officer, we didn't mean any harm, my dad said, holding his hands up. We thought Alex would be fine with it. We've helped him out before, and he owes us. This isn't fair. The officer's expression didn't change. I understand you may have had an expectation, sir, but that doesn't give you the right to violate someone else's boundaries or property. You need to leave now. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. My parents exchanged looks, and I could practically feel the anger boiling in them. But they had no choice. The officer was being patient, but she wasn't going to let them make a scene. She turned to Emily. You can either leave quietly now, or we'll have to escort you. Emily let out a frustrated growl. She was seething with rage, and I could see the wheels turning in her head, thinking about whether she could challenge this in some way. But before she could say anything else, the officer stepped forward, her voice firm. Ma'am, this is your last warning. If you don't leave, I will place you under arrest for trespassing. The weight of those words hit my sister like a ton of bricks. Slowly, reluctantly, she backed away from the door, glaring at me as if I had somehow betrayed her. My parents followed suit, and I saw my mom's face, twisted with frustration and shame, as they all began to leave. As the officer walked them out, I stayed in the doorway, watching them go. It wasn't a moment of satisfaction, not really. It was more like an exhausting relief. The drama, the manipulation, the entitlement, it was all finally over. The police officer glanced at me before she left. If there are any more issues, don't hesitate to call us again, okay? She said in a softer tone. Thank you, officer, I replied, nodding. With that, my parents and Emily were gone. The officer left, making sure to lock the door behind her. And just like that, my life was back to normal. It took a while to process everything. Honestly, I hadn't realized how much weight their constant presence had put on me. It wasn't just the moving in thing. It was years of being expected to drop everything for them, being the one they could manipulate when it was convenient for them. I had never been allowed to have a real sense of my own space, my own life. But now I did. The next day, I spent some time sorting through the aftermath. I figured I'd have to deal with the fallout sooner or later, but for the first time, I didn't feel like I was responsible for fixing things. My phone had a dozen missed calls from my parents, all voicemails of angry rants. Emily's texts were full of insults and demands, calling me everything from selfish to heartless. But I didn't care. I blocked all their numbers. It's been a couple of weeks since that day, and things have settled down. I've gotten some peace, and I've been able to focus more on my own life, my own career, and my friends. I've been able to breathe without constantly looking over my shoulder, wondering when the next favor would come up or when they'd show up asking for something. But now I'm curious. What do you all think? Was I too harsh on them? Did I take things too far? I'm not asking for sympathy, but I'd like to hear what you guys think about the way I handled it. Did I do the right thing? Or could I have approached it differently? I'd love to know your thoughts. I'm Alex, 32, and up until last year, I thought I understood what family meant. Not just in theory, in the deep, unshakable sense of knowing that no matter what, you had people behind you. That belief didn't shatter all at once. It cracked slowly, quietly, like ice beneath your feet before plunging you into freezing water. I'd always played the role of the responsible one. My younger brother, Tyler, was the golden boy, charming, reckless, but always forgiven. I used to brush it off. He's just young, my mom would say. He'll find his way, Dad would chime in. Meanwhile, I was out there busting my back, pulling 60-hour weeks in IT consulting, sending money home every month, covering their utility bills, even putting down a used Toyota in their name when their old car broke down. No one asked me to. I just did it. Because that's what family does, right? It started unraveling after my dad got sick. Not critical, but enough to rack up hospital bills. I didn't hesitate. I wired money, covered the gaps insurance didn't handle, even sent extras so Mom wouldn't have to stress over groceries. Tyler, of course, didn't pitch in. He was between jobs, a phrase he'd been using since he dropped out of his third attempt at college. Yet somehow, he still had new sneakers, nights out, and a steady stream of selfies from music festivals and beach getaways. I never said anything. Again, I told myself, that's just Tyler. I figured Mom and Dad knew what I was doing, that they appreciated it. We weren't a family big on words. No tearful thank yous or heartfelt cards. But I thought the quiet nods, the occasional "we're lucky to have you," were enough. Then one weekend, everything shifted. I'd flown in for Dad's follow-up appointment. The atmosphere was oddly tense, even for us. At lunch, I noticed they were careful with what they said around me, exchanging glances, changing the topic when I asked about long-term plans. That night, while they slept, I was using their home computer to check in on my work email. A PDF caught my eye, something labeled "Final Will 2024 signed." I hesitated. Then I opened it. And there it was, in plain, soul-punching black and white. Everything. The house, the savings account I'd helped grow with my contributions, even the car I'd technically paid off in full, was willed to Tyler. Not shared. Not split. Just his. I remember sitting back in the chair, my stomach dropping as if I'd been gut-punched. There was even a line in the document that said, "We trust Tyler will take care of his sibling if needed." Take care of me? I stared at that sentence for minutes, feeling my jaw tighten. If needed? After everything I'd done, the bills, the groceries, the countless quiet sacrifices, they thought Tyler would take care of me? Like I was the unreliable one. I felt like a guest in a house I had kept running for years. I didn't confront them. I didn't slam doors or shout. I closed the file, took a slow breath, and I quietly decided I was done. When I got back to my apartment the next day, I made a few calls. First, I stopped the auto payments linked to their utilities. Then I called the bank and updated the vehicle registration. I'd never actually transferred the title to their names. That, at least, was still mine. And finally, I canceled the monthly grocery subscription I'd set up for them. One of those boxes that delivered fresh produce and essentials every 2 weeks. Not out of spite, just a shift. If I wasn't family enough to be trusted or acknowledged, I didn't owe them silent servitude. 3 weeks went by. The silence was deafening. No one called. No check-ins. No, "We haven't seen the bill covered. Is everything all right?" I half wondered if maybe they hadn't noticed. Or worse, maybe they noticed and just assumed I was having a rough patch, that I'd fix it soon. Then came the text. It was from my mom. "Mom, the water's been shut off. Can you check with the provider? We haven't gotten any bills lately." No greeting. No "hope you're well." Just that, like I was still their personal assistant. I stared at the screen for a long time, thumb hovering over the keyboard. 100 responses came to mind. Angry ones, sarcastic ones. But I settled on just one. Me. Try asking the son you trust so much. There was a pause. Then the typing bubble appeared and disappeared. Then again. Eventually, a single response came. "Mom, what's that supposed to mean?" I didn't reply. For days after that, I felt strangely hollow. Not angry, just numb. Like I'd finally accepted something I'd been refusing to see for years. That my role in the family was never really about being loved. It was about being useful. Tyler finally called me a week later. His tone was casual, like we were old buddies catching up. "Hey, man, Mom said you're being kind of weird lately. Everything okay?" I nearly laughed. "You mean since I found out you're inheriting everything and I'm not even worth a phone call?" There was a pause. Then he chuckled, like I'd made a dumb joke. "Come on, dude, you know how it is. They just want to make sure things stay simple. You're good. You've got your job, your own place. I'm still figuring stuff out. Still figuring stuff out. At 29. Right?" I said flatly. "Well, good luck with the water bill." And I hung up. That night, I sat in my apartment, the one I'd furnished myself, paid for myself, maintained myself, and felt a strange calm settle over me. Not peace, but clarity. I didn't know them anymore. Not my time. Not my money. Not even my silence. And I hadn't even touched the car situation yet. Tyler didn't call again. Not right away. In fact, it went eerily quiet for another week, like the calm before a storm. I figured maybe they were finally realizing I wasn't bluffing, that they'd have to take care of their own mess for once. But deep down, I knew them too well. I knew silence wasn't surrender. It was regrouping. It was on a Tuesday evening, right as I sat down with some leftover pad thai, that my phone rang. It was my dad. That was rare. Even before all this, he wasn't much of a phone guy. He preferred to speak through short, one-word answers, grunts, or nods of vague approval. So for him to call, actually call, meant something was up. "Alex," he said, voice tired, maybe even hoarse. "We've been having some issues." I didn't say anything. "The electric company says we're 3 weeks overdue." The gas is about to go too. And now they're saying the car's registration lapsed. Your mom said you were handling that. I said calmly. Until I found out you left everything to Tyler. There was a pause. I could hear his breathing, slow, shallow, on the other end. Then a tired sigh. It's not like that, isn't it? I leaned back in my chair, letting the silence stretch between us. You wrote me out of everything. Even the car. The one I bought you. You didn't even ask. We didn't think you'd need anything, he said, almost defensively. You've always been independent. Tyler, he's different. He struggles. That's not my fault, I snapped. I hadn't meant to raise my voice, but the words came out hot, bitter. You know how many times I struggled, too? You just never noticed. Or maybe you did, but it was easier to pretend I was fine. There was another long pause. I paid for that car. I paid your bills. I kept things running. And all I ever got back was a nod, or some half-hearted thanks. And now that things are falling apart, you come to me like it's my job to fix it. I could hear something shifting in his voice when he replied. Not quite anger, not quite regret. Something tired. We didn't mean to hurt you. Yeah, I said quietly. But you did anyway. I ended the call without waiting for a response. I didn't feel good about it. I wasn't raised to hang up on my father. But at that point, the weight of pretending everything was fine had become unbearable. 2 days later, I got an email from the DMV. The car had been flagged for expired tags, and someone had attempted to renew the registration, but the system showed I was still the legal owner. They couldn't proceed without my signature. I smiled when I saw that. Not because I wanted to be petty, but because it reminded me I still had a sliver of control in a situation that had otherwise made me feel completely discarded. That same afternoon, I drove to the DMV and filed the paperwork to have the car reclaimed. I'd never technically transferred the ownership, so it was still under my name. I even paid the towing fee to have it picked up from their driveway. I could only imagine their faces when the tow truck pulled in, hooked up the car, and drove off without a single word. They must have called Tyler, thinking he could smooth things over. But Tyler didn't have a leg to stand on. 3 hours later, he texted me. Tyler, what is wrong with you, man? They took the car. That was Mom and Dad's. Me, no. It was mine. Check the title. Tyler, they needed that. How could you be so cold? Me. Funny. I was thinking the same thing about you. No reply. I didn't hear from any of them for a while after that. Not even a vague attempt at reconciliation. At first, it made me question myself. Was I going too far? Was I being cruel to people who had simply made a bad decision? But the more I thought about it, the more I realized this wasn't about one will. This wasn't about a car or a bill or even Tyler. It was about years of being invisible, of being taken for granted, of being the one who always has it together, so no one had to worry about me. I was useful, not loved. I was dependable, not cherished. And I was done. Then came the breaking point. It was a Sunday morning, about a month after that last text, when I opened my inbox and saw a message from my mom. No greeting, no apology, just, Mom, we're being threatened with foreclosure. Can you help cover the mortgage this month? Just until we get back on our feet. I stared at that message for a long time, the cursor blinking in the reply box like it was daring me to say something, anything. I knew this moment would come, that at some point, they'd come asking for more, that despite cutting me out of everything, they'd still expect me to act like the loyal son. And that's when I made a decision. I didn't respond to the message right away. Instead, I opened up a new document on my laptop. I started typing up a letter, not to them, but to someone else. Someone who'd become a silent player in all this mess without realizing it. It was time to stop being quiet. Time to take back the narrative. The letter wasn't impulsive. If anything, it was something I should have written long ago. I drafted it carefully, taking my time with each sentence, not out of spite, but precision. It wasn't to my parents. It wasn't to Tyler. It was addressed to the family lawyer, the same one listed on the will I'd accidentally stumbled across. Her name was Dana Levington. I'd met her once, briefly, years ago when I'd co-signed a refinancing deal on my parents' house. She likely didn't remember me, but I remembered her. I kept the message brief and professional. Dear Ms. Levington, I recently came across a document labeled Final Will 2024, signed, while visiting my parents, Gary and Marianne. As their eldest son and someone who has financially contributed significantly to the household over the last several years, including mortgage support, vehicle acquisition, and medical expenses, I'd appreciate clarification on whether the attached version is the final and official filing. In particular, I'd like to confirm whether the vehicle listed under their possession is being passed down despite the ownership being solely in my name. Furthermore, I'd appreciate knowing if this will was created under legal advisement, and if there were any conditions or discussions that informed its structure. Respectfully, Alex Monroe. I attached a scanned copy of the will I'd found, hit send, and closed my laptop. Then I waited. I didn't expect a reply right away. Lawyers work slowly, but I wasn't in a rush. Every day that passed added pressure, not to me, but to them. A foreclosure notice isn't something that waits politely. Missed utility bills, car troubles, and a son who suddenly stopped acting like the family ATM. Those things build tension fast. 3 days later, Dana responded. She didn't give away much. Just confirmed that yes, the version I'd found had indeed been signed and filed. Yes, Tyler was the sole beneficiary of all named assets. And yes, she had advised my parents on the matter at their request. There was a line near the end that stuck with me. Your parents felt that Tyler, being in a more vulnerable position, would benefit from additional support and thus preferred to centralize the estate with him. Support, as if being coddled and celebrated for mediocrity was somehow a vulnerable position, as if being reliable and financially independent was a disqualifier from fairness. I didn't reply. There was no point. That same week, Tyler showed up at my place. I'd just gotten home from the gym when I saw him leaning against the railing outside my building, arms crossed, hoodie pulled low over his face like he was trying to look casual. I didn't say anything as I walked up the steps. "You serious about all this?" he asked. I didn't stop walking, just unlocked the door and held it open a few inches. "You want to talk? Do it inside." Quietly, he followed me in. I could feel the tension buzzing around him like static. He paced the living room while I poured a glass of water and leaned against the kitchen counter. "They're falling apart," he said finally. "They're not saying it, but it's bad. They haven't been able to make a single payment since you stopped. I've been trying to help, but I'm already behind on rent." I just watched him, waiting. "And now they're blaming me," he said, laughing bitterly. "Like I told them to leave everything to me. Like this was my idea. Wasn't it?" I asked calmly. "You didn't object. You didn't even think it was odd that the guy covering all the expenses for years wasn't getting a dime. They said you were fine," he snapped. "You had your life together. I just thought, I don't know, maybe they were planning something separate for you." "They weren't," I said. "And you knew that." He slumped onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. For a second, I saw it, the scared little brother beneath all the arrogance. But I couldn't afford to soften. "Not yet. You want me to fix it?" I asked. He looked up, eyes hollow. "Can you?" I didn't answer. Instead, I walked over to my desk drawer, pulled out a small envelope, and tossed it on the coffee table. Inside were copies of every wire transfer, every receipt, every car payment, and utility bill I'd covered in the last 3 years. I'd compiled them quietly, just in case. Every dollar, every date. It was all there. "You can give that to Mom and Dad," I said. "Let them see what support really looked like." He picked up the envelope, opened it, and flipped through the documents in stunned silence. I let him. "I'm not saying this to gloat," I continued. "But you need to understand something. I'm done being invisible. I'm done being useful without being respected. I don't care about the house. I don't care about the savings. But I won't keep paying for people who treat me like a footnote." There was a long pause. Then, quietly, he asked, "So what now?" And that's when the idea hit me, not out of spite, not even out of revenge, but something sharper, something cleaner, something they'd never see coming. "I'm going to tell the truth," I said simply, "to the people who should have known it all along." He looked confused, but I didn't elaborate, because I had one more card to play, something they'd forgotten, or maybe never realized at all, something public and permanent. I waited 3 more days before I made the final move. By then, the guilt had started to bleed through their silence. My mom had sent me 3 more messages, not apologizing, not even acknowledging what they'd done, but masked pleas wrapped in passive-aggressive tones. "It's been hard lately. We never thought we'd be in this position. Wish things didn't feel so distant between us." That kind of language. The kind that tries to tug at your sense of duty without ever owning up to the betrayal. I ignored them. I was done responding to veiled guilt trips. Because I'd already started writing something else. A letter, yes, but one with a broader audience. "See, I'd been helping maintain my parents' small community newsletter for years. Not many people read it, maybe 100 or so neighbors, mostly retirees and quiet couples, but it went out monthly like clockwork. I handled the formatting, updated the events calendar, proofread the submissions. I never asked to be credited, just kept it running smoothly like everything else. This month, the editor had emailed me asking for any final additions before she sent it out. That's when I knew this would be my goodbye, but it wouldn't be silent. I wrote a piece titled, On Gratitude and What We Leave Behind. It was structured like a personal reflection, a story about growing up in a modest home, about choosing to support the people who raised you, and about what it feels like to learn you were never really valued. I didn't use names, but anyone in that neighborhood who'd known our family, even remotely, would be able to read between the lines. I detailed years of bills covered quietly, a car bought without expectation, illnesses handled financially from afar. And then I wrote this. We assume the ones who never complain are fine, that those who give without asking are simply more stable, more fortunate, more responsible. And maybe they are, but it doesn't mean they don't bleed. It doesn't mean they don't feel the sting when they learn they were only ever seen as a tool, useful, convenient, but never truly chosen. Sometimes, the people we trust the most believe they're entitled to our loyalty without giving back love, fairness, or respect. And eventually, those people learn the difference between quiet gratitude and quiet revenge. The editor emailed me back with just one line, "Beautiful piece. I hope whoever this is about reads it." Oh, they read it. The newsletter was delivered the next morning. My parents' phone must have exploded because by 11 a.m., I had 6 missed calls from my mom, 2 from my dad, and, bizarrely, 1 from Tyler. I let them all go to voicemail. Mom's message was breathless, almost panicked. "Alex, everyone saw it. You're blowing things out of proportion. This isn't how family handles issues. You're making us look like monsters." Dad's was colder. "You're embarrassing yourself. We didn't mean to hurt you. This is childish. You've made your point." Tyler's, though, his was the one that caught me off guard. "Hey, just so you know, I confronted them. About everything. About the will, the money, the way they talked about you. You're right. You were always the one holding things together. I didn't want to believe it before, but it's obvious now. I'm sorry for not standing up for you sooner." I sat with that voicemail for a long time. It wasn't enough to erase years of imbalance. It didn't undo the damage, but it was something, and more than I ever expected to get from him. Later that afternoon, I got a knock at my door. When I looked through the peephole, I saw my mom. Not dressed up, not holding a guilt-offering casserole like she used to. Just her, shoulders hunched, hands wringing a tissue. I didn't open the door, not out of cruelty, but because I wasn't ready. She stood there for a full 5 minutes before finally sliding an envelope through the gap in the frame and leaving quietly. Inside was a letter, handwritten, the first I'd received from her in my adult life. It read, *Alex. If I could undo what we did, I would. Not because of the fallout or the neighbor's stares, but because I finally see the hurt. I didn't know how much we were leaning on you until you stepped away. I didn't know how much silence can scream until you stopped answering. You deserved better, from us, from me. I was wrong to assume you'd always be fine. I was wrong to assume you didn't need to feel chosen, too. Your father is too proud to say it, but he's ashamed. Tyler's been trying to talk sense into him, but it's hard for him to let go of control. I'm not asking for anything. Just forgiveness, maybe. Someday. I'm so sorry. I hope it's not too late. Love. Mom. I didn't cry when I read it. I wish I could say I did, that there was some dramatic flood of emotion and closure. But the truth is, I felt tired. Like a chapter was closing, and I didn't have the energy to re-enter it just yet. Maybe I would eventually. Maybe I'd call her one day. But I wasn't in a rush. In the weeks that followed, the foreclosure warning turned into a final notice. Tyler, to his credit, stepped up. He got a second job, a real one this time, and moved back into the house to help with expenses. I heard through a mutual friend that he'd been using the envelope of receipts I gave him to push for fairness in the will. He'd even called Dana and started the process to formally renounce parts of the inheritance, trying to shift things back to something more balanced. I didn't interfere. I watched from afar as the family I once carried learned how to carry themselves. And for the first time in years, I let myself breathe. One evening, about 2 months after everything unfolded, I got a card in the mail. No return address, just a plain envelope. Inside was a photo. It was the old Toyota, newly washed, sitting in my parents' driveway with a note under the windshield. We're just borrowing it. Thank you for everything. It's still yours when you want it. I smiled. Not because I needed the car back. I didn't. But because, for once, they understood. It wasn't about the car. It never was. It was about finally being seen. And for the first time in a long time, I was.